Welcome to the Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical souls, to the show. I've been in the midst of some deep wounds this last few weeks, and specifically the witch wound and her full expression just not feeling welcome. And I'm sharing that vulnerably with you because I've seen just how important it really is for the witch to have permission to be vulnerable, open, and courageous, and to be her full expression of darkness at times as well. And it's my heart's deepest vision for all of our women walking this path to know that all of them is welcome. And that includes all the parts that they outcast themselves and stay secret witches for because they just don't feel lovable. And one of those in particular is topically her anxious meltdowns, which I'll be diving into in a moment. But just before I do introduce the show, if you are feeling that pain of being outcast, then please know that you are so welcome in our Facebook group. I've seen that whilst others often don't feel our hearts as witches, it can be because our comfort in the darkness is uncomfortable for others, but other witches will feel you. So if that is you, we would love you to join us. Just simply search Secret Witch Circle on Facebook and we'll see you there. Meanwhile, on the Secret Witch Show today, I dive into how a symptom of being a secret phosphoric witch who doesn't know her own magical power can often be anxiety and overwhelm. I explore how women can begin to learn to love themselves through this in a way that all is welcome in order to reconnect to our whole-souled expression rather than attempting to fix it as if it's something wrong. In this episode, we explore the different views of anxiety from the mainstream and magical lenses, how the witch came here to find the gold in her wounds, including anxiety and overwhelm as an expression of our wounds, and how to love ourselves through all of that to see the deeper wisdom contained within our meltdowns. Let's dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to our episode around how to love yourself through anxiety and overwhelm. I am showing up as a little bit husky today, so my voice is sounding rather sexy in comparison to normal. I don't know whether you can actually hear that, but yeah, it's feeling good to me. So, anxiety and overwhelm, and I just want to begin this episode by just bringing the utmost love to those of you who have been drawn here to listen to this episode. It's something that is so common for the secret witch to feel that anxiety and overwhelm, so it's a really important episode for us to dive into. And magically, just before it was a while ago actually, I think it was last week, I was reading an article which I revisited today from my own soul guide from Psychology Today, and it was talking about mental disorders as evolved cognitive styles. And this was really interesting to me because often anxiety, overwhelm can be seen as this kind of mental illness, this mental disorder, especially by the mundane world, and that makes it something to fix. And this article was posing the question, how can we change mindsets to see that our different cognitive styles make us valuable to society, not burdensome? And I thought that was a really, really interesting question, because it's certainly the way that I see things working in the magical lens. And yet in modern day society, it's very, very different. There's a very different approach to, in the mundane world, to things like anxiety and overwhelm. And in particular, this article is talking about things like ADHD and autism, and celebrating the diversity brought to our culture by these different brains. And one of the quotes that stood out to me was, it said, "Far from being deficits, autism and ADHD are viewed as cognitive specializations that play a critical role in enabling human groups to adapt both in the past and the present." And it also went on to say how bipolar disorder's manic episodes can actually enhance leadership, creativity and energy, how autism is associated with enhanced visual spatial skills and superior attention, heightened awareness of the physical non-social world, and that schizophrenia can be a precursor to training in shamanism, which I thought was magical, which is of course a prized role, as it describes, in some magical societies. And this article really was critiquing, and I'll share the article in the show notes, but it was critiquing Western psychiatry's biomedical paradigm as a hindrance rather than cutting edge scientific work, which I thought was really, really interesting, particularly as I was coming here to talk about anxiety and overwhelm as voted by the magical women in our group. And I was thinking, to me, it feels like this is true, but like for most people, it's quite radical to suggest that what if this is the same for anxiety and overwhelm? What if anxiety and overwhelm contain within them some deeper gifts? And that is certainly the way that I see it. And it's what I'm going to be exploring today as we navigate how to love yourself through anxiety and overwhelm. And I think just holding it like this, this is important to presence, because holding it in this way, as like there being a gift of anxiety and overwhelm, like really allows permission for us to begin that process of loving ourselves through anxiety and overwhelm. So I just wanted to presence that first, because it's so interesting how the mundane modern world views anxiety and overwhelm as mental illness and something to be fixed. Therefore, the suggestion that there's something wrong with us. And actually, in fact, it's also kind of integral to the witch and her magic in many ways, which I'll speak more to later. But the funny thing is as well, and I just wanted to present this because, again, it's often where my women have journeyed, is that many healing modalities are also aiming to fix anxiety. And that can even be with things like traditional homeopathy, the way that that's dosed, which is the lineage that my wild apothecary path is based on, but also many other traditional magical modalities like Reiki, etc. So those sorts of things can all still be working within the kind of modern mainstream paradigm view of anxiety and overwhelm, in that they're seeing as something wrong, that is something to be fixed. And I think this is something that's really important to, again, just point to, because one of the things that I've seen really clearly is how often my magical women will arrive at my door and they will have kind of tried to pack their magic into a mundane box. And it's really interesting because as I look to the other magical modalities, that is exactly what they are doing. They are trying to take the mundane or mainstream, should we call it, worldview, and basically cramp magic to fit it, which I've talked to a little bit in other episodes actually, and definitely one coming up with Dean Radin. We talked about this as well, but essentially we're kind of in our kind of fear of magic and being unapologetically magical. Often women who are offering these therapies, these magical modalities, will be offering them in a way that tries to fit the mundane, tries to fit the mainstream. And what that can do is kind of lose the real magic available in the alchemy of welcoming things like anxiety and overwhelm. So I was saying the other day in my group, actually, to a woman, that this is how traditional healing modalities aim to dose people. And it's often that they kind of, as I said, like put magical modalities into a modality that will fit the mainstream world, which has this worldview of healing sickness. And they view sickness, including anxiety and overwhelm, which is something they would kind of call as sickness, as something wrong, as something to be healed, and largely also as something to be healed by others external to ourselves. Hence, you'll go to a therapist and be dosed with the kind of something to fix your anxiety or overwhelm, or indeed whatever the symptom is. It doesn't have to just be anxiety or overwhelm. It could be anything. This is typically how the mainstream healing mechanism is interested in working. And for me, that is super interesting. And it's also important to presence that we talk about healing a lot in this path. But the way that I mean it when I talk about healing is very different. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more, because it'll help you start to begin to understand the way that we work here in the magical lens, which is very, very different. Although it's still like a healing method, a healing journey, it is a very different one with a very different approach to the typical, even mainstream and magical healing therapies. So my vision for the world apothecary philosophy that I guide women through, which is, as I said, becoming a healing method in its own right, is not one of traditional healing. And that sounds bold to say, but what I mean by that is I am not here personally to heal you and your anxiety or overwhelm. And for one, to me, that feels... anxiety and overwhelm feel to be something that are completely welcome, as I said, as this kind of portal into the gift that is contained within anxiety and overwhelm. And I'll talk to that a little bit more as we journey today. But basically, anxiety and overwhelm contains wisdom that can be your guide if you choose to work with it. And for the second thing, the second reason why I'm not here to heal you is that for another thing, it is not a method that I will dose to you in order to heal you. The way that I work is that I guide you into working with the remedies yourself in order to take them yourself and journey with them yourself and learn to become your own healer. And this is true whether you're a magical one who's a healer for others, or whether you're someone who is like really struggling with the witch wound, that kind of phosphoric wound of like self-expression. You're here to kind of love yourself through those wounds of not being able to express yourself. So this isn't about me healing you. This is about you learning to heal yourself. And what we mean by healing isn't fixing something, but alchemizing the gold that is contained within it, which in and of itself will likely also be healing in terms of the traditional fix, but it's not with that kind of purpose, that vision, that intention in mind. When we come from the idea of trying to fix something in the magical lens, it's coming from something that I know William Whitecloud talks to as this compensating focus, and I love the way he explains that. So I always share when I'm talking about this, I always share his way of wording it, because for me, when we're looking at fixing something, it's like we're looking to remove something, to cut it away, which again is that very mainstream lens. Whereas what we're actually doing here is having a focus of like who we want to be, who we want to create, who we want to return to, which is ultimately the person that we came here to be. So again, I'm going to share a little bit more about that because it's related to my vision. But it's really clear, I am not dosing you, you are not fixing yourself. So the way that I explain that is my vision is to transform the homeopathic lineage of my work from that of a model that heals sickness. And I think homeopathy is probably one of the closest things to what I'm talking about here, but it still can be used in a way that has that compensating focus of fixing. So it's like transforming from that model of healing sickness for it becoming a model for the world that is one of returning women and people to their whole-souled expression, to their fullness. and essentially who they came here to be, to their constitution, to who they were born as. And this means that I dose remedies which aren't here to just work away without your conscious effort. They're not here with a focus of getting rid of your darkness, but to love your darkness, to work with it alchemically, magically, with the remedies, so that you can become who you came here to be. And your anxiety and your overwhelm are all helpful parts of that. So the focus is not a degenerative one of fixing what's broken, but a generative, magical focus. And this is really what makes magic magical, makes magic real and powerful technology, is this generative focus of loving what is already there, hiding. It's the Secret Witch after all. Bringing all of that back into wholeness so that you can be fully expressed in your gold, in the gold that's been reclaimed from these wounds. And that is where the deep healing is. So we are reclaiming soul expression, not healing symptoms. So that's really important for me to presence just before we move in. And it also feels important, significant to just speak to like where you've been in this journey with anxiety and overwhelm, because it's likely that it has been from this kind of fixing way of being. So if you're here listening to this podcast, it's possible, and this doesn't mean that's compulsory, just to be clear, but it's possible that you've already journeyed with anxiety and overwhelm quite a bit from this lens of it being something to fix. So usually my women have often tried counselling or self-care, and like then come to the woo phase where they've kind of dabbled in all the magical modalities with little true lasting change at times. Then they may also have journeyed with the self-help rebellion, as I call it, where instead of trying to fix, you've gone, sod it, I am good enough as I am, except you don't actually feel that. You just say it in a kind of rebellion way. Or you may also, and I say all of these because I confidently can say I've tried all of these myself, so these are not I'm not making this wrong at all, but you may have learned to bypass anxiety entirely by avoiding being in the human realm. And again, I have been there for many years, so yeah, I know exactly where we have journeyed. But for some of you, you may also, and this again isn't a prerequisite to walking the path. This may not be true for everybody. It may be that women are here to liberate their witch wound. But for some, you may also have trained in healing modalities as practitioners, and you've made some life changes, but you still suffer with some anxiety and overwhelm. Or, like I say, you could just be someone really drawn to magic, but a little bit, either way, a little bit disenchanted because it's not really helped your anxiety and overwhelm. It may have helped to an extent, but it's not created that long-lasting change. It also might be that you've had some kind of temporary relief from some of the things that you used to suffer anxiety and overwhelm about, and that those things have now shifted and changed from where you used to suffer with them. For example, now you might feel overwhelmed at being stuck in the mundane world. You might be overwhelmed at your disenchantment with magic. You might be anxious that you really long to express yourself and you just feel you can't. You might feel anxious that you long to be a healer and you haven't yet made it a success, or that you've spent so much money on healing and it's still not worked. Essentially you're possibly still anxious and overwhelmed, perhaps a little less than you were before, but it's still there, and it may be about different things. For example, it might have been at one point that when you were back in that phase of like being really, really suppressed, and I know this, I'm just trying to think of my own examples now. I would once have been really ill with chronic fatigue and really fearing, as well as like truly desiring to leave the house and leave those four walls, also simultaneously being in deep anxiety and overwhelm about that. So that has shifted as I've journeyed in specifically into magic as well. I still, just to say, like, anxiety and overwhelm is something that we learn to love, and in the process of that it becomes less, but it will still appear from time to time. And so for me, if I experience overwhelm or anxiety, it's more probably in the overwhelm rather than the anxious state that I feel now. But it can be about kind of, I don't know, something related to my business, which is a million miles away from the anxiety and the type of anxiety that I used to experience, which would have been pretty much constant, even about things like leaving the house. And that might be where you are still too as well. But yeah, just to give that example of how anxiety can change and shift, especially if we are in the work of doing all these things. But let me think where I was going with that. Essentially, it may still be there. It may be different, and you might be avoiding life because of it, in the name of doing the opposite as well of the pushing and forcing that you used to do. So that's another way that this can show up, is that you can have got to that point of like overwhelm, that where you used to push and force your way through life, which again was the case for me. You then do the opposite of pushing and forcing, and you're kind of like avoiding life and just kind of floating along in magic but not really actually creating what is in your heart, what is in your soul, not being who you came here to be. And again, I share that with complete love, because that is exactly where I'm literally speaking from my own journey here. And the core thing that feels really, really relevant and important to share here is that the real true difference in how it's possible to alchemize anxiety and overwhelm is found in this magical lens. And again, you might say, well, I've been trying all the magical healing, but it didn't work. And the real difference that I want to share here is that it's likely that you've been harnessing the magical lens, as I mentioned, either unintentionally or unconsciously. And that will have been completely innocent. It's often not taught how to work with magic consciously in most paths, and that is what makes the difference here in the path of wild alchemy, because the path we share here is that of real, powerful, magical technology. So this is working consciously and intentionally with the remedies of the wild that can open us up to a new way of being with anxiety and overwhelm, that will eventually have us able to love ourselves until that anxiety and overwhelm starts to dissolve and we coagulate and reform as who we were born as. And that isn't from a place of fixing, that is from a place of focusing on who we're here to be. And I describe it here in the path as you'll kind of heal all the layers of wounding that cloud you from being your phosphoric, fiery, open, deeply sensitive, witchy full expression, and that full expression of soul that you were here to be in the world. And of course, as I mentioned, that is also a lifetime's work. So as hard as that is to hear, like we want this quick fix. That's why the mundane, the mainstream lens is so powerful and so popular, because people don't want to feel their anxiety and overwhelm. People just want to take pills and have that go away. And again, that is completely innocent. That is how we've been taught. That is, if that is where you're at, that is perfect. That absolutely, like again, I have been there. And there is possibility, there is a new way for you that has you in your truth, has you not being numbed out, has you being able to hold this anxiety and see the gifts that are contained with it. So yes, it is a lifetime's work, and it becomes less and less and less the more we learn to love our anxiety. So it also dissolves, and we know that it is okay for anxiety to be there, and magically, as we accept it and welcome it in more and more, that will also have it become, as we really focus on our vision, less and less likely to be there. Though, of course, that is not the focus of why we do it, because if it is, it becomes a compensating focus and defeats the object. Like, that ruins the alchemy. So love is the alchemy. Hence this episode being about how to love yourself in anxiety and overwhelm. So this really is a welcoming of all, literally all. And anxiety and overwhelm is what I often talk about when I'm calling it darkness. There can be other emotions, obviously. Generally, something that the mainstream world kind of perceives as unwelcome is what I tend to call darkness, because that's how it can feel to our witch when she's right in the midst of these emotions, these sensations, these feelings. All of the stuff about anxiety and overwhelm, it can feel like a gaping black hole that she can get lost in if she isn't aware that anxiety and overwhelm can also simply be a normal part of being a magical one and hold gifts. And it can literally be one of the symptoms of being a witch. In fact, I was just looking at the Materia Medica, which is basically like a book of remedies and how they show up, the kind of archetypal remedies of homeopathy, if you like, which is very much how we work in this path. Is each remedy has its own personality profile, and this particular personality profile that we work with, the phosphoric constitution, the phosphoric witch, she is described as, which by the way tends to be who my women are, magical ones who don't yet know the true beauty of their magic. One of the things that described her was anxious as if about to die. So this anxiety is literally who you were born here, what you were born here to experience so that you could find the gold. Your soul came here to live out particular remedy relationships, one of which phosphoric women were born into, to feel and experience this anxiety as a witch, because it is also the place where we can alchemize gold. So again, I'm going to go into that, but in another place that I looked at, another Materia Medica, it says about phosphorus, people who need this remedy are open-hearted, imaginative, excitable, easily startled, and full of intense and vivid fears. Strong anxiety can be triggered by thinking of almost anything. Nervous and sensitive to others, they can overextend themselves with sympathy to the point of feeling exhausted and spaced out, or even getting ill. So this really begins to build a picture of just how much anxiety can be part of a phosphoric witch who's in her burned out state. And one of the things that I've seen very recently, and I've seen this for a while, but there was a new depth that this got taken to, and I'll explain more in a moment. But it's so much so that darkness itself is part of the witch, that I've been wondering recently if darkness is actually needed. And again, this goes back to what that article was saying, really. Like, sometimes it's actually needed to be experienced, and sometimes it's in my own anxious moments of complete meltdown or overwhelm, moments of complete meltdown, which can happen, that I create something major. And an example of this recently is I had a complete meltdown, and then the next minute, despite like being fully in the darkness, I had manifested some amazing candidates for my new team as I begin to birth this wild alchemy philosophy into the world and bring it wider into the world. So that is absolute magic. And for me, the only way I could explain it, because it feels needed at times for me to have these intense experiences. Like, it's, for me, the way I see it is that it's like the intensity of the energy of anxiety being expressed supercharges the intention. And in that moment, my frustration was around the desire of having a team that was really aligned. And as long as we direct this energy in the direction of our desires and not what we don't want, then that's really helpful, which is why that compensating focus is so crucial to see. Because usually what happens when we're in anxiety, we're not thinking about what we do want, we're thinking about what we don't want, and that fixing element. So that actually is the key, because the witch is always always manifesting. Often manifestation is taught in a way that's like, in order to manifest, you need to do X, Y, Z, as if like we're not already manifesting. But the witch is always manifesting, and that may be true, but for other people that's not the case, although it doesn't feel that way to me. Like, we're always creating with our thoughts. So, but the witch particularly is always manifesting. And just to be really clear, I don't share this with fear of you need to be careful what you're speaking, because that itself can be anxiety inducing. So that is not where I'm going with that. Do not fear what you're creating. It's, again, all is welcome. So where you're creating from right now is perfect. And there's still the path of the deep shadow work and love in order to help you shift that focus, see what is in the way of you creating from a clean focus. But seeing that our focus creates our reality is really, really powerful, especially as a witch who has these deep, intense emotions. And this is why that work to reclaim the magical energy the witch has from that shadow fear and harness it towards her desires is so important. And again, so much love in that journey is required, which is why we're talking about how to love yourself through anxiety and overwhelm. And one of the other things that I see is that, as I talked about in the article at the beginning, that often for the witch, the anxiety and overwhelm can also be part of neurodivergence. So often, again, these magical women will be neurodivergent, and as I talked about at the beginning, our brains work differently. This is something I've recently discovered for myself, that I am autistic, and yeah, our brains work differently. So if you are neurodivergent, which also you may not know, but you can tend to experience that sensory overload, which can express as meltdowns. And it's quite revolutionary to come to see that this is normal. This is a normal part of your makeup. This is a normal part of your constitution. And just to be clear, you don't have to be neurodivergent to be a witch, but it's possible that you could be. But all is welcome regardless. And one thing I'm going to share is something that happened to me recently. And it was because I was experiencing a deep moment of anxiety and overwhelm. As I mentioned, doesn't just kind of heal and disappear, but we learn to love it. And it's rarer and rarer for me these days to feel that. It's nothing like it would have been back in the time when I had chronic fatigue, for example. But we learn to work with our anxiety and overwhelm. And I had a deep meltdown, and it left me. There's a circle that I'm part of with my sisters, and it left me crying in circle, like just fully expressing meltdown. And for me, it looked like fully expressing meltdown. To them, it felt like I was really closed. And afterwards, not one person reached out to me. And this is really interesting because I remember thinking, wow, it really isn't welcome to feel this. And this got me really, really curious about the witch. And I journeyed with this through with my soul guide, and eventually decided to ask for feedback on why it was the case that I wasn't being felt, I wasn't being seen, and really powerfully and courageously posted something to ask for feedback. And again, this really got me thinking about the difference between the witch and the lighter archetypes, which it feels important to share this with you in this episode because it does truly show how there's a real difference between the witch and, say, the priestess, who's here to be kind of lighter, more kind of, much more light than the witch. And it shows you truly how welcome anxiety and overwhelm are for the witch, often, if they allow it to be. But for me, because I've journeyed with that, my emotions have always been quite intense, and it really highlighted that for me, that intense emotion was really welcome, and yet for others, it really wasn't. So I asked for feedback And I received 1 or 2 answers. And this is sovereign circle, so bear in mind that I had consciously chosen into receiving this feedback. And the feedback was that I'd come across as a victim, as closed, as someone who would be challenging to engage with in the melted down state I was in. And there was that, and one particular gorgeous soul helped me journey with that. But the rest of the group just either didn't respond or responded from trigger. And of course, this triggered the hell out of me because my little girl just wanted to be loved in her anxious overwhelm, not rejected. And I can even feel as I'm saying that, just like how I've got goosebumps, like how much that is the witch. Like the witch just wants to be loved. And yet she shames this intense emotion, this anxiety, this overwhelm that she can feel, which is a precious gift at times. And I thought about it, there was so much pain and so much gold within this experience, and I'm still journeying with it. But essentially what I saw was that when we witches are in our anxious meltdowns, for me, it feels that they have to be expressed. And that can be done in a shadowy way, that can be done in a loving way, but and there's no shame in either. For me, that had to be expressed in a meltdown. It kind of bubbles up almost like a coiled spring and can come out in this very fearful lachesis snake energy, I would call it homeopathically. Like a coiled spring that just kind of spits venom. That's how I was being. That expression, or there is so much fear that it is completely suppressed and directed inwards, which is also another expression of anxiety and overwhelm that's common in my women that will have them completely disconnect from themselves. But for me, it's more that lachesis version of that. And what was interesting was, for me, I've also been very fortunate to grow up in a home where my emotions were openly welcomed. No matter how angry, how vile, how victim, I was always loved, and at least by my mum. And it's what has me have, there's so much more shadow to that, to what I just said, but it's not relevant to this conversation, but it's what has me have the rare gift to truly welcome those expressions in others, to truly be in those difficult conversations that others aren't willing to be in. And I really saw that in our experience within our circle. And my heart felt, ironically, deeply open in this, but I was received as closed because my anxious overwhelm turned into an expression of appearing really closed. And that was real gold for me because, again, I was able to see, and again, there's more to this story that I've seen about how we witches can embody grace and love in order to share vulnerably, so that people can receive our open hearts as phosphoric ones, so that people can feel us as open and not feel as triggered. And I'm still journeying with that. But this particular episode isn't about that so much as the anxiety and overwhelm. But this particular episode that is really about loving ourselves in our anxiety and overwhelm. So it's not relevant to go there, but what's important to see is that this common challenge of the witch is exactly that. It's allowing her anxiety, her overwhelm, or whatever it is that wants to be expressed to express. And the challenge is that because usually the witch will fear that if it is expressed, it will be shamed, it will be unlovable, and she will be outcast for it, which is essentially exactly how it felt to me. And just to be clear, I am talking about this because suppression is what takes our energy. And it is expression of what we're feeling that is needed in order to heal. And that starts with us. It starts with us being able to express it for ourselves. And it can also be the hardest thing for a witch, because if she explodes, it's also likely that intensity is hard for others to be with, except for here, because I'm here for it. And so if you want to join our group and express yourself in there, you're very welcome. But there's deeper alchemy to be had there. around that, which isn't particularly pertinent to this episode. But the first step, the reason I'm sharing this is the first step in this, whether you're suppressing or expressing in a way that's from fear, because just to be clear, both of those are coming from fear, whether we're suppressing it and not expressing at all, or we're expressing it in a way that's it's just all coming out, that is all fear-based, and it's still welcome in my book. But the first step, whatever it is to love yourself in your anxiety or overwhelm or whatever else the emotion is, rather than seeking to fix it. And that takes courage. And I share that because, again, I'm sharing this vulnerably because where I've been, because it feels really important to really witness, like, I did not see actually my own courage. And I didn't appreciate how much courage it takes to be able to do that. Particularly, as I say, because I was used to courageously expressing my emotions. And I didn't see that hadn't been possible for all witches. So this has been really powerful to see that the witch is here for darkness. The witch is here for those difficult conversations. The witch is here to dive into her anxiety and overwhelm. And that requires courage. And I really did see that so clearly when I was in the midst of this darkness. So the deep invitation here, and this is where the love comes in, is to begin to welcome your own anxiety and to even welcome the shadowy, fearful expression of it too. Because although that is coming from fear, although it's kind of coming from that not wanting to be vulnerable often at times, it is also lovable. And especially by ourselves. And in doing this is the only way that we can truly begin to be with it. I was feeling so outcast in that particular experience that I just really saw that I was here to learn to love those parts of myself. And that's what I did. So that's really, really important, because that is the only way that you can truly begin to be with whatever is wanting to be seen. And again, usually anxiety and overwhelm are carrying deeply important gold. And this is where I'm coming to now. So within our anxiety and overwhelm, which I've talked about as being a gift, you're possibly like, well, how is that possibly a gift? And it is a gift because it holds deeply important wisdom. Our anxiety, our overwhelm, contains messages for us that are trying to guide us. For example, my anxiety and overwhelm recently, prior to the experience in Circle, was guiding me to really create space for myself to birth this wild apothecary philosophy and method with full focus and intention. And so listening to my body's signals, to the wisdom of my anxiety and overwhelm was really helpful. And we need to, of course, do this consciously, because anxiety and overwhelm is a set of symptoms that is showing us that we have fear present. So they're not usually pointing us to a deep desire directly, although if you kind of dig enough, then you'll probably find one. But ultimately, if you're feeling the typical common signs and symptoms of anxiety, and you'll likely feel that in your body, in your mind, and in your soul, which is going to be exhausted. But ultimately, if your nervous system is revved, then it wants some love. And we can talk about the various ways to kind of calm your nervous system and love yourself when you're in that anxiety and overwhelm. But ultimately, the deeper thing, and again, those things are important, the deeper thing is, what does your anxiety and overwhelm want you to know? Does it want you to slow down and hear your soul's deeper calling? Does it want you to take a different path? Does it want you to let you know about a fear that keeps showing up that's stopping you from living out your soul will? Does it want you to know that you have a tendency to perfectionism that the witch typically has? Does it want you to know not to take things so seriously? Does it want you to know that you're seeking approval all the time from others? Does it want you to be in control? Does it want you to show that you've got an outdated belief about yourself that's not really true? Does it want to keep you safe from something that isn't really aligned? Does it want you to express a need or a desire of the heart? And some of these things are coming from shadow and fear, particularly if they're related to approval, control, or security. But either way, anxiety is letting you know via a little nudge in the body, like those palpitations that you feel in your chest, or the tummy sickness that you feel, that you're feeling like that kind of pain of anxiety physically. That is there to tell you something. So the deeper question is, what fears are circulating in your system that want some love in order for you to truly know what your soul wants you to know? Because ultimately all sickness, even physical sickness, is soul sickness. There's a great quote actually that I shared recently by James Tyler Kent, who is one of the fathers of, not the father of, but one of the well-respected fathers of homeopathy. And he says, there is no cell or tissue so small that it does not keep its soul and life force in it. And I love that. It just really points to the fact that sickness is soul sickness. So what does your soul, when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling that your cells like revved up and anxious, like what does your soul want you to know? What wounds are showing up for you to love yourself back to that soulfulness in? Because this is what anxiety and overwhelm is really here to show us. Those deep wounds are really calling to us for love and transformation. And yet, instead of offering that to ourselves, offering that gift to ourselves, we avoid it, we distract from it, we shame ourselves for it, we fear it, we ignore it, in case we do not fit into the mundane world, in case people will say we're just anxious, in case we are outcast. And yet, what if anxiety and overwhelm were gifts that were here to wake us up to living our deeper soul purpose? And I say that really, really like with reverence for the fact that it will not likely feel like a gift. Again, I always say like this path is not easy to walk, and people are like, yeah, that's fine, let's walk it. And then I'm like, no, it really isn't easy. There is a real devotion to allowing yourself to go into the dark places that we don't want to go in our culture, that we just don't want to go. And this is only something that is for the witch. The witch is likely the only archetype that will really truly want to be in that deep dark work. It also became clear when I was chatting with my sisters that actually part of my I think it was my gene keys, part of my gene keys, there's a couple of elements of my gene keys that were relevant. One was truth, because the witch is literally here for truth. She literally needs to understand like what her gift was, what she's here for, and she's also here for the deep dark truth. Like she's comfortable, she can be, even if she's not right now. The secret witch often isn't comfortable, but she can be deeply comfortable in the darkness. Like that is who she's come here to be. So it might feel difficult, but know that if you are here, if you're resonating, you're here for it. Like this is who you've come here to be. So truth and naturalness as well. Like we're here to be that natural expression. I literally was here to be that natural expression of the darkness that often can be triggering. And the right people will love that and appreciate that, because it gives them permission to be that for themselves. That is what we're here walking this path for, is that of self-expression. And the other part that made me giggle, that I was chatting to a dear sister about, was that there's this kind of narcissistic tendency in the witch where she really wants to understand herself, and it makes her seriously focused on understanding her wounds, understanding her gold, and really like diving deep into it courageously. So she, again, is literally here for the darkness. She wants to dive right in and discover, like, what is this darkness of mine? And it was quite funny because the one sister who was really courageous enough to share with me these reflections, she was like, oh, well, you know, sometimes I feel like, she's like, are you sure it's okay to share it with you? I was like, yes, please share it with me. And she was like, but are you really sure? I was like, yes, tell me. And then she told me in the nicest way that the kind of truth that I was wanting to hear. And she said, you just kind of gobble this up like a witch, a really dark witch, like just gobbling all the facts. Like you don't really care if they're palatable or not. You just gobble it all up because there's this kind of, again, it can often feel narcissistic in some ways, but there's this tendency to like really want to know ourselves. And that really made me chuckle because, again, like the witch came here for this darkness. So if you are experiencing it, this is exactly what you came here for. And it makes sense because the witch wound is all about full expression, not feeling welcome. And yet, if we can welcome it ourselves, then the healing ripples of that will be going out into the world, because not everybody is here to fit into the mundane. And the thing I saw is that if we can create space to be with our anxiety and overwhelm and get to the root of it and love ourselves fully in what is showing up, in honouring ourselves, in facing and honouring the pain that arises in our little girls as we allow ourselves to go there, that is so, so healing. And yeah, that's where the magic is, because when we're there, when we've come to that place of loving our anxiety, seeing what the gifts are, we can then lovingly focus in the direction of our souls, of what our vision is, of what we want to create. And that is where we are returned to that soul wholeness. Soul wholeness, that sounds a really weird way of saying it, that whole soulness, let's say. Soul wholeness, I can't even say it. But yes, so I just want to speak briefly to, if you are experiencing anxiety and overwhelm and this doesn't feel accessible to you, then the first thing I'd recommend is to really allow yourself space and permission to just do something loving for yourself. If you're in anxiety, if you're in overwhelm and you're just like at that point of like, I just don't know what to do, then what does your little girl need? What do you need in this moment? And can you give yourself that? Just grant yourself permission. And this is, let me grant you permission. Just like go and do something that feels nurturing. I actually have a list of like my soul nourishment next to me, which is always a nice reminder that if there is that darkness that we're in, we need to nourish our souls. So that could be, for example, I've got my own list here, come up with your own, but like my list is like diffusing essential oils, incense, going to my tree for a wild wander, getting my feet in the earth, doing rituals, dancing, journaling, like meditating, doing yoga, reading a book, sound healing, baths, lighting candles, lounging in my bed. Funnily enough, I'm not lounging in my bed as I record this, but this morning I was like, right, I'm going to really nourish my nervous system today after the things that I've been seeing recently about circle. I've been really, really tending to my nervous system. That's essentially what I'm inviting you to do. The other book that's really good for this is Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger, which I've recommended before. There was actually an episode I spoke to about nervous system regulation as well, so it might be worth revisiting that episode if you've not caught that one. But essentially I'm inviting you to cultivate your nervous system and tend it and love that first, if that is where you're at in terms of loving yourself through your anxiety and overwhelm. Grant yourself that permission first to nurture and nourish yourself, and not in a distractive way, but in a way of like clearing space for you to just be with what is arising and tend your nervous system. And I've just remembered the point that I was going to. Like today I'm not in my bed, but I am in my onesie, my furry onesie, because I was like, oh, I want to be cozy today. I want to be nurturing to my soul. So I've got my linseed tea and my candle, my fire, and my pink fairy onesie. What better way to embody the nurturing that is required? I haven't got any clients today, so we're all good. I'm not going to be showing up in my onesie to them. But yes, so do tend your nervous system if you are experiencing that state of anxiety and overwhelm. And when you feel like you have given yourself that love, you'll be feeling so much better. But there's also these deeper questions that you can go into. So I'm going to leave you with those questions. So there's 3 questions. 1 is, what is your anxiety and overwhelm trying to nudge you to know? Number 2 is, what is the fear of even hearing that wisdom? Because it may be that you are even avoiding asking that question, which is really, really powerful to illuminate. Like, what's the deeper fear of you allowing yourself to go into your anxiety and overwhelm in a loving way? And number 3 is, what is the wisdom that becomes available to you as you begin to get some elevation over that anxiety and overwhelm, and you tune more deeply into your heart? Like, what hidden desires are beyond your anxiety and overwhelm? And spend some time, again, combine this with your soul nourishment, combine this with your nervous system regulation, then go into the inquiry and spend some time with that inquiry, journal on it, be with it. Particularly the question around, like, what's the fear of you allowing yourself to even hear what your anxiety and overwhelm is trying to tell you? Perhaps that should have been the question number 1, actually. So maybe do it in that order if you haven't already paused to answer the questions. But there's so much gold here to be reclaimed. And yeah, those questions are really going to be powerful in enabling you to begin that journey of loving yourself through anxiety and overwhelm. And really the first step is just giving yourself that permission to. I know I talk about this over and over again in different topics, but that kind of permission giving for yourself to trust the journey, to open to the journey of allowing yourself to reconnect to you, to trusting the magic, to trusting a different way, to trusting that it is possible for you to heal, and not in a way that's trying to fix. That feels nourishing. So I'm going to finish with just that brief reminder that we are always manifesting. So if your focus is on anxiety and overwhelm, that is where we will be. If we're on that fixing, that compensating focus, that is what we're going to get. On the other hand, if we can allow ourselves to drop into trust of magic, if we can allow ourselves to really alchemize and be with and love ourselves in that experience of anxiety and overwhelm, whilst also being able, like, if we're focused on love, there was just an example actually before where I was like focusing on like what is the most loving and honoring thing I can do here. Like, that is always a great question when we're in anxiety and overwhelm. What is going to focus me back to love for myself, love for others? That is like, as long as our focus is on love, that is what we're going to create. So if we focus on loving ourselves in our anxiety and overwhelm, we will get more love. So that is always the deep work. The deep work is to love ourselves in anxiety and overwhelm first and foremost. And it helps to know that it is a personality trait of the Phosphoric Witch to feel intense emotions, including anxiety and overwhelm. And that is perfect. And we realize that we can come back to our hearts, and that is so tough when we're in it. But what is it that our hearts want to create? I'm going to leave you there, and I would love to hear what's come up for you in this episode. So please do share, whether that's via our group, via our page, or Instagram, wherever this episode is shared. Or I think there's also a form on our website as well in the podcast episode page. So please do share where you're at in this journey of anxiety and what resonated for you. And yeah, I'm going to leave you there with so much love. It is not an easy one, and just know that you are so, so held and so, so welcome here in this space. Oh, my love. Well, I loved the paradigm shifting wisdom in this particular episode. Here are my takeaways. The mundane lens looks at anxiety and overwhelm as mental illness, but there is starting to be research that sees our different cognitive styles can make mental disorders valuable to society, not burdensome and something to fix. The magical lens also often treats anxiety and overwhelm as something to fix and to be fixed by an external. And this is often because healers have innocently tried to fit magic into a mundane box to make it more palatable because they don't feel they can be unapologetically magical. And this is a path that doesn't honour the real magical technology available to us. There is scope for a model, which is what I'm creating in this path of Wild Apothecary, that transforms the healing sickness model of traditional woo into a model that teaches people to return themselves to their whole-souled expression, to heal themselves so that they can fully express who their soul was born to be. A generative and loving focus which welcomes anxiety with love is what will help us to return to our soul. Unlike a degenerative, compensating focus that has us try and fix our anxiety. And it's helpful to know that we are always manifesting whatever our focus is on. A witch came here for the human darkness. So if you're listening, know that you have got this and that you can hold your anxiety and overwhelm. And in fact, it can actually be a gift that points you to some gold, although it may not feel like it at the time. It is loving and welcoming our anxiety that will help us to alchemize it magically. The more we can love ourselves, the more healing we can create for ourselves. You can start this process by tending to your nervous system and being in the inquiry of what's the deeper fear of even allowing myself to hear what my anxiety and overwhelm want me to know. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.